Children born into cults and left. What was your moment? I was born into a radical Pentecostal church during the early 80s and 90s when exorcism was a thing. They would perform these during church and home groups on Sunday nights. It was always interesting to watch because the people would go all out, talking in a different demon voice, ushers needing to hold them down and convulsing on the floor. It was Sunday night and I was at our youth pastor's house for home group. I was 14. After the singing and praise, the youth pastor started his speech. There's someone here who's been backsliding away from God. They've changed and seem to have, blah blah blah. I remember thinking, ooh, who's it going to be today? And that's when I heard my name called and, can you please come to the middle? Definitely took me off guard, but like a good sheep I went. Everyone gathered around me, started putting hands on me and speaking in tongues. Then the youth pastor placed one hand on my back and the other on my stomach. As it started to kick off, getting louder and louder, that's when the youth pastor started to give me the Heimlich, basically getting his hand all up under my rib cage. It hurt and only got worse. I was thinking to myself, how the heck am I going to get out of this? So, I faked being slain in the Holy Spirit and fell to the ground. I stayed still and everyone backed off and continued praising the Lord. What felt like an eternity. I was grabbed by the arms and they moved me to a different room. I waited a bit longer and finally got up and left. I haven't been to church since. I'm 39. I always imagine a cult as people wearing dark robes and chanting around an altar for something a little sinister. So I'm not really sure what qualifies as a cult, but this might qualify as right now. I'm a Methodist, which is a pretty low-key Christian denomination. I've never been to a church with a priest, always a preacher. I dated a girl a while ago whose family were longtime members of what one might label a very fundamentalist Christian sect. As far as I know, the only members of this group are in this one city in Texas, where we both lived at the time, and it's a very Christian city with a little bit of a history with extremist Christian groups. Her stepfather was normally pretty curt to her mother whenever I saw them together, and according to her he was pretty verbally abusive to her when others weren't around. Her group's priest, when she went to him for some counseling on leaving him, told her to just love him and suffer through it because that's what their scripture said. Their whole group was pretty heavily in on women remained subservient to men in all scenarios. Now, for the definitively cult-y things. Their scripture was the Bible, but cherry-picked to get rid of some things, and with a few extra books added that their priest had stuck in because he'd had visions that told him to do so. The members needed permission from the priest to leave the church, and they had to do a period of counseling with him before even looking into a separation, much less an actual divorce. They had a few homes where college-age kids and the church could live together while going to the local university. The students who were around when I was in school weren't bad people as far as I can tell, just a little hipster why. They did have mandated worship and prayer time every single morning. My girlfriend lived there for a year before we dated, because the rent was super low, and she later said that they really freaked her out. Their scripture was the Bible, but cherry-picked to get rid of some things. The first thing that came to mind is the verse that basically demands men to love, respect, and care for their wives the same way they would care for themselves. So yeah, a lot of cherry picking was done here. I brought my own kids up in culty Pentecostal type churches. I don't know what their oh crap moments were, but they all realized fairly early on that they didn't believe any of it. As soon as I started to listen to my own doubts, which is tricky when you think they come from the devil, they started taking to me about thinking more clearly and honestly. That led directly to my own moment when I realized the only reason I still went to church was that I liked singing. I can honestly say my own kids helped me escape that crap, and I'm forever indebted to them. Senior year of HS. I guess we were finally old enough to talk about something interesting in theology class, so our teacher talked about cults. Now anytime another religion was mentioned, it was 10% education, 90% smear piece propaganda. But on this afternoon, as the teacher was talking about how satanic cults rob you of the truth and how Mormons believe the most insane things, my thought process went something like this. 1. Whoa, they all have some such strong faith, to even die for their religion. 2. It's incredible that they had such faith, and yet they were ultimately so mistaken. I guess that feeling really certain about something isn't good enough. Even just a bit of skepticism could have saved them. 3. Oh crap. Am I in a cult? Yes. Young you unfortunately, you were. I didn't grow up in a cult, but I did grow up cult adjacent. My parents were long-term missionaries, meaning they did it all the time, not like 6-month or even 2-year stints, and part of a missionary team. There were 3 other families on their missionary team. 2 were culty, 1 was normal. I mean, normal for someone who is dedicating their lives, and their children's lives in part, to living in a foreign country to indoctrinate the natives. But, you know, it's all relative. The first time I clearly remember thinking BB crazy was when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. The mom of one of the crazy families was teaching Sunday school. Sunday school that day consisted of the mom, me, my sister, and maybe another boy. She was lecturing us about secular music versus godly music. Except it wasn't about the lyrics. It was about the actual music. Not, like, rock music or drums are bad. Nope. That I would have been like, well, that's disappointing but okay. Instead, she was going on and on about how songs that didn't definitively end, I guess songs that faded out, would get stuck on your head, and you'd repeat them over and over without meaning, which was bad because chanting, I think, chanting was of the devil, and spells used chanting, and the devil would control your mind that way, and then there was a whole thing about a certain number of beats being sinful, but as I was very young, tone deaf, and literally don't even like music, I just fully zoned out at this point and just smiled and nodded at the appropriate points. But I distinctly remember thinking she was insane, just well and truly nuts. I was pretty concerned about her level of crazy, because I told my dad about it, and he was like, don't worry about it, you don't have to believe that. Which of course leads to the thought, if we don't have to believe that, what else do we not have to believe? Turns out the lot of it, when you grown up to be a heathen. When my parents told me they would let me die if I needed a blood transfusion. When I was never allowed to play with any worldly kids at school. When I was not allowed to celebrate my birthday or any other holiday. In 1998 I was told to throw away Final Fantasy VII because I would become demonized. In 1995, my mom threw away my entire comic book collection. When my daughter was physically shamed by another member of the cult and I was not allowed to call the police. When I was told I could not talk to my brother because he had fricked before he was married. When I had fellatio for the first time in my life after being married for 15 years. A cult banned it even if you were married. Finding out I had a cousin who was 25. My uncles left 40 years ago and we were not allowed to talk to them. I could think of some more. My family broke off from the main LDS church in the 60s or 70s because it wasn't conservative enough for them. I don't know if I'd fully categorize it as a cult, but it was bad. Really, really bad. Most Mormons I know now and have talked to about it are flabbergasted by it. They cherry-picked rules and ideas from a bunch of various conservative movements, but most of our religious ideology was based around Mormonism. I knew I had to get out when Matthew Shepard got murdered, and my parents considered his killers to be doing the Lord's work. As a very young boy who already knew he was gay, it was a rude awakening that they considered murderers and the right over a gay guy who hadn't done anything wrong. I waited it out until college. Somehow, I managed to convince my parents to let me go to a secular school states away. I came out and was told I needed to quit school and come home for an ex-gay program or be kicked out of the family, and chose the latter. I haven't spoken to any of my family in years outside of an uncle who escaped as well, except once, when my sister called to inform me my mother died, then asked for money to help pay for a funeral I wasn't allowed to attend. I told her I wouldn't do it unless me and my fiance could go, and she hung up on me. I do creep on my cousin's Facebook though. She married a guy who is a normal Mormon, apparently, and is now allowed to use the internet. Except for her, every member of my family I've seen in pictures looks miserable. Except for her, every member of my family I've seen in pictures looks miserable. This is one of the biggest issues. A lot of people are convinced that they should be miserable if they are doing religion right. It leads to bizarre things. My old man was a bigwig in the J-Dub cult. Part of his gig was the hospital committee, which meant I was dragged along weekly to check in on members who were hospitalized, basically to make sure they weren't getting those nasty, sinful, life-saving blood transfusions. A poor girl, 12 or 13, had been hit by a speedboat while swimming, chopped to bits. A million stitches. Pins holding severed limbs on. Just FN brutal. Amazing that she was still breathing. And yet the focus of my dong father and her whole family was to hold hands around her bandaged body and pray for her forgiveness in the eyes of Jehovah because she had committed the mortal sin of not dying due to the miracle of a blood transfusion. The Children's Aid Society had legally intervened and saved her life, and these dongs are weeping over her like it would have been better if she died because of her grave sin. I was horrified and realized I needed to get the frick away from these psychos ASAP. Like others, my experience maybe wouldn't be categorized as a true cult, but the whole think like the herd and don't question God's plan really made me feel like it. It was a fairly mainstream religion, but so robotic and hypocritical I'd still consider a fricked up way to be. The things that started it for me was a teacher at the private school run by the church, insisting, rather cruelly, that my pets can't go to heaven because they have no souls. I was 6 and felt like it was just a heartless thing to do. Also, the gender biasness. This was reflected in the dress code policy. The whole idea that girls carry the responsibility to be wholesome and not tempting in any way by wearing long skirts, no sleeveless shirts, etc. Also, the teachers saying mean and hurtful things to students, body shaming, before it was ever called that, a thin-built girl for being too skinny, making fun of the poor kids for being less well-kept than the other students, bad-mouthing students publicly, humiliating corporal punishment. I have no idea where the religious messages of Jesus' love fit in there because I sure didn't hear it much. Only the abuse from the pious staff. I just remembered. They spouted a lot of soon you'll be required to take the mark of the beast, an implant in your hand or forehead, but you must resist and be willing to die for the church. I only recently found out that the whole mark of the beast thing was based on a totally hypothetical, fictional, film from the 70s some pastor made, who later said it was a work of fiction. But by then it was already too late and many fundamentalist church groups took it and ran with it. It's based on Revelation 13:16. I had ventured onto the internet and googled the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I saw that one of the search suggestions included the word cult and it went on from there. It was eye-opening and comforting to know that my doubts could be validated. My parents' church does not recognize divorce, ever. You marry once, and that's it. Remarriage is living in adultery and is no different than sleeping around. A man joined the church who was happily married with 2 young children, except she was his second wife. The church elders actually convinced this guy to leave his wife because she wasn't his true wife. Just torpedoed that family to heck. Frick that balls. WWCG here. They had said people who follow all the rules in the Bible, but weren't members of that particular church, would still go to heck. There were plenty other WTF teachings, but that's the one that really made me call BS. There was no one particular moment. It was a slow process of seeing through all the lies and learning to form my own opinions through critical thinking, rather than just accepting things I was always told. I do remember one particular moment though. I was drinking with some friends and started to feel guilty because I thought I was sinning. And then I decided that I was miserable enough of the time and I might as well just enjoy this moment. So I did. This is so important. I left for the same reason. I felt so much guilt for the stupidest crap. Finally I realized that even if that guilt went away I would be happy where I was. So I stopped feeling guilty and started living for myself. Not really a cult, but I grew up in a Muslim country and family. My family wasn't really that religious, but the people around us were. When I was in high school, our biology teacher refused to teach us about evolution because she knew that we and every living thing were created just like this. After that, I did some research about it and it really made sense. I lost many friends because of it, but the ones who decided to search the truth with me are now my friends forever. I grew up in an evangelical Christian household where both parents were devoted prayer warriors. For those not familiar with the term, a prayer warrior is an individual who is committed to praying for others, and we would go to church 4-5 times out of the week to do so. My oh crap moment was when we passed by a family in their broken down car on the side of the road and my parents told us to pray. I asked shouldn't we help them, and my mother said we are. We are helping them by praying to God for someone to help. I was 8. I am no longer religious and I stop to help people stranded on the side of the road whenever I can because it's the right thing to do. When my girlfriend was forced to confess in front of the congregation for causing the fall into sin of the guy who physically shamed and violated her and then marry him because he was called to preach. No idea where they went. I've looked. Her father was the assistant pastor and put a gun to me to get me away from her. I was a teenager. The deacons weren't fans of mine either, to say the least. This makes my blood boil. People hide so much cruelty under the guise of religion. It's baffling. As a child, I was once taken to a religious demigod or something. I was standing on the queue waiting for my turn. Since my mother forced it upon me, the person cured a person sitting on a wheelchair right in front of me. It looked very well scripted, and it was my turn to follow up. I was experiencing anxiety issues and naturally, my mother was worried. The person told me some generic stuff at first, but I was a naive child and I went on to ask specific questions like, if you really know my past, tell me what scares me the most and stuff. He answered a few stuff a normal child would, like needles, but I wasn't afraid of it. I pointed it out quite clearly, and he became red in front of so many people. My mother then told me to shut up, but I quite enjoyed it. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. My oh crap moment was probably meeting my gay co-worker John. John absolutely terrified me because of how I was taught to think of gays. But John was cool. John had a husband and a kid, and he seemed like a really good dad. John was super nice and helped train me at my job. He was fantastic. I was so freaked out being so near a gay person, but all I could think about was what's the big deal? That was a big wake up call. It started me on my path of not buying into the homophobic bulls. I think it was enough to start my critical thinking journey. Meeting John was in 2008. I stopped attending meetings in 2014, and I've been battling the brainwashing ever since. It's crazy how deep the indoctrination goes, but I'm feeling better and more confident than ever. I did end up losing 99% of my friends and family, so I'm slowly trying to rebuild that as well. It sucks, but it's better than living a lie for sure. I just had my oh crap moment a few months ago. I've been an atheist, don't really care for my entire adult life, but I was raised in an ashram. My parents were incredibly involved in the ashram and completely looked up to the guru. My father passed away a few years ago, but my mother is still just as involved, donating money, doing the practices, now at 72 as she was when she joined at 28. Even though I stepped away from the ashram, I always thought they were fine and made my mother happy, so to each their own. Then, a few months ago my mother tells me she needs to get something off her chest. Apparently, the right-hand man of the guru violated her, and that's my real father. She says she never told anyone because she wanted a baby so badly that the guru made this happen just so she could have a baby, since the man that raised me couldn't get her pregnant. It was both infuriating and incredibly heartbreaking to hear her put so much faith into her beliefs in this manner. To realize that she was so brainwashed. To not only not ask for help at the time, but to see this as some sort of gift. After she told me this, I reached out to a swami that used to be a big part of the ashram. I honestly don't know what I was expecting, but the man that raised me is dead, and my apparent real father mother's dead nature is also dead, and my mother refused to talk to me about it anymore because I was so upset. The swami basically mirrored what my mother said. If that's what happened, it was for the best. The guru is all known blah blah blah. People need to be held responsible for their actions. You can't explain away a debauchery in this manner. I understand that it was a different time, and there could have been other things keeping my mom from speaking up. But her main reason for why she didn't was because she truly believed that on a spiritual level the guru wouldn't allow something to happen within the ashram that wasn't supposed to. I don't even know what to do with this information, but mostly I feel incredibly sad for my mom. My biggest oh crap moment was when my parents found out that I had masturbated. I was forced to meet in a room with our bishop, who was basically an old man. He asked me anything from what P did I watch, and what was depicted, to how long it took for me to have an orgasm. I was freaked the heck out, and I've still been forced into these interviews since then. Also, when my parents forced me to donate 10% of all the money I made to the church as well. Thankfully I'll be moving out next month. Was living with a girl in a flat share for a while. We took in her good friend. a Turkish girl who left home because of her tyrant father. It escalated when he slapped her one day for being a rebel. Well, not a rebel in the traditional sense. She was exceptionally good in school and very clever, polite and pretty. Everything started going downhill in her family when she told her parents that she doesn't believe in their faith. She never wore a headscarf, so the family must have been little more progressive and rejects the conservative culture in general. She told them she wants to have a career, travel the world, etc. The dad obviously had other plans that included an arranged marriage. Once she lived with us, the harassment started. Angry messages on our answering machine, plants broken, car door keyed, and visits and encounters with the larger family that included an angry younger brother that threatened us repeatedly with physical violence. We had no evidence for the broken stuff, but one day when the family was frantically knocking on our door demanding to take her home, we recorded it and called the police. The father told the police we kidnapped her to pimp her out, but the police got a pretty good understanding what was going on. They had a serious word with the family. We never pursued further action, such as pressing charges, as it was already a stressful situation for the girl. Luckily the harassment stopped and her mom even came to apologize with clothes and food. Last thing I know, she moved to her aunt's place, who was a modern woman teaching at an university and who got estranged from the family as well. I really hope she could follow her dreams and leave crazy family behind her. Drifted away from the grips of the cult and my family for years and got isolated by everyone I grew up with and had a very difficult time making new friends. One day I just decided I'd cut ties entirely. Wasn't till then I really started investigating the background and origins of my fundamentalist Christian upbringing, and that it in fact was a high control group and a cult. Finally all the abuse I've seen growing up and all the mental health issues of everyone around me made sense. All the backwards conditioning I've been fed since I was old enough to understand my parents suddenly was uncovered in the light of sensible morals and ethics. I will never forget the day I visited my family for the last time to declare that I was not gonna be a part of their way of life and make a stand against their beliefs. My stepdad flat out dropped his cutlery on his dinner plate in shock. My mom started crying. My brother walked out of the room without a word and hasn't spoken to me since. I recorded the audio of that moment and I still listen to it sometimes. And even though it hurts, I'm reaffirmed every time that I made the right choice. Step 1. Put the audio on YouTube. Step 2. Profit. No, seriously, release the audio. Back in the late 90s, some friends, co-workers of mine were involved with a local church that bordered on cult status. They kept trying to get me to go to one of their services with them, talking about how great the sermons were, how the community within Church was very welcoming, etc. I was agnostic at the time and skeptical because of a few things they also told me, but I went to check it out myself. At first everything seemed like any other church, friendly people, charismatic pastor, singing, praying, etc. But then I noticed things were weird when the pastor started speaking in tongues and the entire congregation did as well on cue. This happened at least 3 times during the service, and each time, everyone in the church besides me joined in. The church also encouraged all but forced young members to join their religion school to receive a degree in faith. The school was pretty expensive, around $2,000 in 1997, or about $3,100 today, which caused most members to take out a loan from the church to pay for. Members in their early 20s were not allowed to date or fraternize in any way with the opposite gender while in school. The church even rented out multiple apartments in a local complex where students were housed together. Non-members were not allowed to rent rooms or be in the apartment without a chaperone. I think what bothered me most was how intrusive the church was in these young people's lives. They required the members to report their incomes, demanded tithes, and regulated every aspect of the members' lives. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.